Hello, and welcome back to the Americano Show. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Owen Matthews, who is our Russia correspondent, but also a bit of an expert on Turkey. And we're going to be talking about whether Turkey is going to get involved in this conflict. Because, in recent minutes, it's emerged that Turkey has said it has intercepted a missile that came into its airspace. And the Foreign Ministry of Turkey has conveyed its protest, according to local reports, to Tehran about this incursion. Owen, what do you make of the latest news, first of all? Because as you've recently written for the Spectator, this morning, in fact, Turkey and Iran have quite a good relationship, do they not?
Yeah, that's true. So the short answer is jury's out on whether Iran actually intended to attack Turkey, because the missile that was shot down over Hatay, which is in the southeastern corner of the Mediterranean, is went over Iraq and it went over Syria before going into Turkish airspace. So, I mean, if it was Iran's intention to attack Turkey, that's a very weird way to do it. I mean, it's they have a 550-kilometer border, so I mean, it's possible that was just a stray. It would certainly be really surprising and frankly suicidal if the Iranians had decided to start attacking Turkey, because, as I point out, actually, in many ways, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is actually, you know, as much a friend to Iran as he is to America, which is to say, not very much in either way. I mean, he's very he's been pushing Turkish national interests rather ruthlessly for 25 years. But the point is that actually there's very close ties between economically and in terms of oil and gas, and in terms of intelligence links between Turkey and Iran. And I think Iran would be completely mental and suicidal if they decided to attack someone who is, if not quite really a regional ally, but definitely like an honest broker that could be very helpful to them.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people would say Iran is behaving in a mental and suicidal way at the moment. But an important aspect of this, I think, is that inasmuch as America or the Trump administration seem to have a plan, and there's a lot of debate about that, one part of it appears to be using the Kurds. Donald Trump has been on the phone to Kurdish leaders. And it's also reported by CNN yesterday that the CIA has been arming the Kurds, or has a strategy for arming the Kurds. Israel has also reportedly been trying to arm and foment possibly some kind of Kurdish revolt in Iran. This is very, very dangerous stuff, and it's also very, very alarming for Turkey, is it not?
Yes, indeed. I mean, it's the sum of all fears for Ankara, because the Turkish state fought, or rather the Kurdish insurgents fought, a 35-year insurgency against the Turkish state that claimed over 40,000 lives. Over 6,000 villages, Kurdish villages, were forcibly depopulated. It was a major trauma for Turkey in the 80s and the 90s. And also one thing that is super important for contemporary Turkish politics is pro-Kurdish parties are basically the electoral kingmakers in Turkish politics. Now, that's really super important to bear in mind, actually, is that, and that's a huge factor in Erdogan's attitude towards the Kurds. So the last thing Erdogan or Turkey wants, both for tactical political reasons and for national security reasons, is a new upsurgence of Kurdish irredentism, a new Kurdish rebellion, in other words. So the American plan, I mean, it's not being confirmed, but I think it's been widely and quite reliably reported, is indeed to use the Kurds. Now, the Kurds are estimates vary, but at least 10% of the population of Iran. Iran, by the way, is a minority Persian country. It's a majority minority country if you count in the Arabs, the Turkmens, the Azeris, the Yazidis. There's endless ethnic groups, and if you're an armchair strategist in Washington's Beltway, and sort of keen on playing, Risk, the board game, you think, oh, look at these people, like they are anti-regime. Let's pile them in, and that bright idea has occurred to America at least 8 times in the last 75 years, because they've used the Kurds against the Iraqi regime as early as 1963. They're constantly using, like, how about the Kurds? They're going to be our boots on the ground. And every time the Kurds have risen up loyally, most recently against ISIS, before that against Saddam Hussein, and they've been rewarded with precisely nothing. So there's one question about whether it's a good idea to start a civil war in Iran. I suspect that may backfire rather badly. And the other idea is whether the Kurds themselves are going to be up for this, and what their expectations are going to be.
And I mean, we're hearing people in Washington, administration people, suggesting, no, America's not going to repeat the mistakes of Iraq. This is a very different type of war. I believe they're even calling it a special operation and refusing to call it a war, similar to similar to Vladimir Putin and Ukraine. But as you say, if the strategy for the future of Iran is to cause the Kurds to foment a revolt within Iran, putting pressure on the Islamic Republic of Iran, then that is the Iraqi strategy, is it not?
Well, yeah, indeed, that's exactly what it is. It's also the sort of Northern Alliance strategy, as it were. I mean, the same thing happened with proxy forces, of the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan in 2001. I was actually with those guys when the Taliban regime basically collapsed in November in 2001, and the Northern Alliance sort of rushed into Kabul and picked up the pieces. But I think this is a very different strategy. I mean, from what we're hearing, there's a few bits and pieces that have been reported. Apparently, the American strategy is not to use the Kurds as a force to sort of march all the way to Tehran, but to sort of, be the sort of, kamikaze guys who engage Pasdaran Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps forces in the West, thereby making it easier for the nice pro-Western liberals in Tehran to seize power. So in other words, the Kurds are going to be doing all the fighting and the heavy lifting. Again, that doesn't sound like a great deal for the Kurds, but a really crucial point is that actually the Iranian opposition is actually extremely against this. And Reza Pahlavi, the sort of heir apparent to the Iranian imperial throne, has recently completely dumped on the Kurdish alliance and said that they called them separatists and called them dangerous, because actually the prospect of the breakup of Iran is also deeply alarming to plenty of opposition people as well as to the mullahs themselves.
But then if there is to be a crack up of Iran, if Iran is going to descend into a civil war and all its various ethnic groups turn on each other and it becomes a kind of large failed state, do you think, like Libya, like Syria, do you think that could be not part of the plan, but that could be fine with what the Trump administration wanted to achieve, which is to take down the Islamic Republic of Iran as it currently is?
Well, great, yes, but exactly the same process, the same thinking applies. Is that actually, when you're replacing one, one regional evil with another that's far more dangerous. See Saddam Hussein, see Assad, and the basically 15-year campaign to get rid of him. Bred monsters. That you didn't really have to look very far for excellent examples of how dangerous regime change can be. Iraq, Syria and Libya are very proximate examples, and they're exactly um, and they stem from precisely the same strategic model, which is massive air power, you know no boots on the ground or limited boots on the ground, but and then just let the locals duke it out, and that actually has turned out to be a terrible outcome, not just for the countries involved, but also for the United States too.
Well, it has been for the United States, but I suppose from a very, if you take morality out of it, obviously there's a terrorism issue, there's potentially an immigration issue into Europe and onto America. But in terms of what happens in Iran, a very cold-hearted strategist could say a civil war in Iran, as long as they're not threatening our allies in the region, that's no great skin off our nose.
Yeah, that's exactly what the German staff believed when they put Lenin on his train. Like, here's a brilliant wheeze. We're gonna introduce some dangerous revolutionaries. It's gonna mess up our Eastern opponent, and there's going to be no blowback. But unfortunately, that doesn't really work. I mean, and in terms of blowback, I mean, the biggest blowback of all that sort of was the starting gun for the modern world we're living in, was actually the toppling of the of the Soviet occupation, or the Soviet-backed regime in Afghanistan back in the 80s. I mean, which created Al Qaeda, which created via the Mujahideen and CIA backing and so on. So the thing is that these kind of brilliant wheezes actually have a terrible habit of blowing back on their on the deep thinkers that hatch them.
And this is what a lot of people on now quite near the top of the Republican Party have been saying a lot about. America's long involvement in the Middle East is that it historically there has been blowback. That you look at the Mujahideen and so on. Every time America has tried to support a proxy to do something it wants in the region, that has created consequences that have, in the end, harmed America's interests.
Well, yeah, yes, but the thing is, I'm a historian by training. I mean, we know that history doesn't really have hard and fast rules. I mean, they have, there are patterns. Yeah, I mean, there's a chance that this could all go well, and there's sort of happy clappy coalition of, of minorities that have successfully overthrown the mullahs, and they reform the government into some sort of federal Iran, whatever. I mean, it's not impossible. It's not sort of doomed to failure by the failure of past extremely similar projects in the same region using the same strategy. However, it's probably it's probably a dangerous idea to intervene in a country that is extremely complicated, and also very much more fragile than I think we imagine. I mean, because even in Turkey, I mean, something that really stays with me. I mean, back in 2015, I was in the old city of Diyarbakir in southeast Turkey, like tourist center, fantastic ancient fortress and citadel, and I was clambering over these barricades, talking to these teenage Kurdish PKK guerrillas, with bandanas on their faces and Kalashnikovs over their shoulders. And I spent days with these PKK guys. They're absolutely brainwashed, fanatical, particularly the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which is active in Turkey, and even a state as strong and as established and as with such powerful security services as Turkey completely lost control of a whole swathe of its major cities in the southeast in an insurgency that just came out of nowhere in 2015, just when everyone thought that the Kurds were over. So the point is that actually in a region where ethnic identity, as we've seen in Iraq and Syria, and in Lebanon too, and in Libya, ethnic identity and sectarian identity is actually much stronger than statehood. So, that's a sort of fundamental structural problem with all of these states, up to and including Turkey, who you think is the one that's completely on it, but it's not on it. I mean, I saw it, 9 years ago. Literally, the Turkish states and the security just collapsed overnight, and was routed by a few thousand very determined fighters. And the same applies to Iran, although Iran actually is, ironically, more or less the only state that's more or less in the same geographical location in the region than and certainly has been there from its current borders are roughly date back to about 1632. But despite that, it's still wildly it's still wildly disparate within itself, and in a situation where you have economic collapse, runaway inflation, the currency has lost, more than half its value over the last year. You have a lot of anger against the regime. The state is weak, and rebels have a chance to split the state apart along ethnic and sectarian lines, and that doesn't usually end well.
Well, I mean, there are also different identities among the Kurds. Could you give us, for our listeners, for me as well,
Yeah.
I should add, and possibly for any war planners in Washington who might be watching, give us a little kind of potted history of the different Kurdish groups, the strife between them, and so on.
Yeah, good. Well, I'll have to go and plug in my laptop, so it'll take about an hour and a half. But if you want the
Make it
90-second
very
version,
potted, please.
if you want the 90-second version, the split that we need to worry about, I mean, the split that we most need to worry about or think about is between the two different factions of Iranian Kurds. Let's leave the factions of the Iraqi Kurds, the KDP and the PUK aside. But there's a much more powerful group of Iranian Kurds called PJAK, and they are affiliated to the Turkish PKK, and they have a much stronger ground game inside Iran. They're the ones that have actually been attacking Iranian Revolutionary Guard positions, and it was however, Trump is not talking to those guys because they've been designated as terrorists by the United States since 2009 because they're affiliated to Turkey's PKK. Then there's the other gang, which has just recently formed after 8 months of negotiations, sponsored by the Israelis, into a democratic front of Iranian Kurds. And they are the ones that are, I suppose, officially have official channels to the Israelis and to the Americans. And they are the sort of democratic, sort of non-terrorist face of the Iranian of the Iranian Kurdish resistance movement, and they actually do have troops and organization, or sort of forces and organization, if not actually inside Iran. Well, they got armed forces on the borders of Iran and high organization inside Iran. So, as witnessed by a sort of Kurdish resistance organized general strike in January, where 39 Kurdish towns inside Iran came out on mass general strike. So, the Kurds are famous for fighting each other. In fact, there's something that Reza Pahlavi said when he denounced them. He said, like, these guys who want to now overthrow the regime have a track record of both working with Ayatollah Khomeini and with Saddam Hussein. And that's kind of the problem with proxy wars. In fact, it was this, it was the same with a story in Ukraine, by the way, in the 18th century, 17th and 18th century. Like, the Ottomans, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and the Russians all used different Ukrainian rebel groups to bash the other person. So it's like a story as old as time and as old as empire, that actually fractious national insurgent groups get co-opted and suborned and used by powerful neighbors. In this case, the powerful neighbor happens to be the United States, but there are sort of Kurds that the United States considered to be good Kurds, and there's Kurds that they are sort of are the naughty Kurds because they're the ones who are affiliated with the PKK. I could go on.
Well, no, but that was very good. We'll leave it there. But we should come back for a special episode on the Kurds. But I did want to ask about Reza Pahlavi just quickly. We will get back to Turkey because I did say that's what this podcast was going to be about. But on Pahlavi, I mean, most experts, I believe, don't really think he has any credible chance of forming a sustainable government in Iran. Is that your understanding? And is the fact that, I mean, he's saying that he doesn't support the Kurds, but I mean the Kurds actually, the reason why they're attractive to Washington planners who want to cause trouble for the Iranian regime is because they have force and they have they could cause some impact in a civil war situation.
They've got a ground game.
They've got a ground game, exactly. So there's no such thing for Pahlavi or any kind of revival of the Shah or anything like that, is there?
Well, that's the big difference and the big danger with this sort of top-down regime change, because if you just compare it to regime change, shock and awe in Iraq, there was no immediate opposition waiting to take over in Baghdad. There was, a pro-Iranian sort of Shia group, well armed, that took over the south. There was the Kurds that took over the north, or they already controlled the north, and you just had the power vacuum in the middle. In Syria, last year, you actually had quite a well-prepared rebel group. Affiliated to Al Qaeda, but I think everyone's agreed that bygones are bygones, and the guy put on a suit and trimmed his beard, so I think it's okay. We're willing to overlook that, but the point is that actually there was actually a sort of government in waiting. In fact, a rebel army that came in and put that government in waiting in power. In Iran, there's no such analogy. There's no such thing. There's actually there's a very performative and vocal community of Iranian exiles, but inside Iran, there's actually no real opposition, and that's kind of for very obvious reasons. The same reason why there's no vocal opposition inside Putin's Russia. So it's because it's been repeatedly decapitated and crushed by the regime's very, very ruthless and cruel security services. So in a word, what I'm trying to say is that actually, whether Pahlavi has a chance or not is not clear. But the point is that there's nobody, that's on the ground that has an established network, either political or practical, for taking over power. And that's kind of the Trump White House's problem with this. They can, the old world can be destroyed, but the new world is yet to be born, as Antonio Gramsci almost said.
Let's go back to Turkey, because actually one phrase you're hearing quite a lot about Turkey is that it could be emerging as the new Iran. Naftali Bennett, the Israeli politician, said this. And I think what's meant by that is that all recent conflicts, Turkey appears to have gained a bit of an upper hand in Syria, perhaps now in Iran, perhaps also in other countries and other situations that are developing in the Middle East. Is that correct? Is that a correct analysis, the way of seeing it?
Well, indeed. I mean, I'm not sure that people are saying it, but one person has been saying it, which is Israel's former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, and that's his phrase. Iran is Turkey is the new Iran. So, personally, I think that's completely nuts and a total misinterpretation. So, what is he talking about? He's talking about Turkey's very successful sort of campaign to make regional allies, including Qatar, including supporting the new Syrian regime, and including building a sort of almost a China-style Belt and Road initiative, going from the Red Sea through Iraq, through Turkey into Europe. It's like a trade corridor. plus helping Azerbaijan, with expel the Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020, which was very much helped by Turkish military advisors and drones and so on. So okay, in that sense, it's true that Turkey is having great success in spreading its influence and reshaping the region in its image, but that's very different to what Iran was doing. In its axis of resistance, and it's completely different in its scope. Turks want to get rich. They don't want to reform the Ottoman Empire. They don't really have they're supposedly becoming more Islamic, but I don't think anyone would seriously argue they're becoming Islamist. And nor are they about to start sort of fomenting, like the international jihadist movements like the Islamic Brotherhood, although they did in fact have some support for international jihadis, fighting when they were fighting against ISIS or so on. They found some good jihadis who eventually now run Syria. But anyway, but the intention of Iran in creating an axis of resistance was indeed, as Bennett totally erroneously said about Turkey, was to sort of create a chokehold to extinguish Israel. There's no evidence whatsoever that Turkey has any intention of extinguishing Israel. I mean, however rocky the relationship may be between Erdogan and Netanyahu, that's a completely different. It's just a category error. Turkey is becoming important in the region because it's very good at building commercial and relationships. It's very good at sort of sitting on the fence and staying out of America's proxy wars, basically. So I think Bennett is completely wrong that actually Turkey is not conspicuously malign. However, it is conspicuously effective and conspicuously powerful.
And you'd say that power has grown. I mean, I suppose the new Iran analysis might just be that its power grew as a result of just as Iran profited from the Iraq War, Turkey seems to have profited from recent conflicts.
Well, profited, I'm not sure is a great way to put it. I mean, they kind of pulled it together. I mean, they didn't really profit, to be honest, because they, not least because they absorbed 1.5 million, or I think it may be even 2.5 million Syrians in total, Syrian refugees. It had very, lucrative commercial links to Saddam Hussein's Iraq. I mean, yeah, it's profiting, yes, indeed, because there's now a building reconstruction boom in Syria and in Iraq, thanks to their funding from oil money. Well, that's great, but I mean, that's not quite the same. Sort of sending in your major engineers and sort of construction companies is not quite the same as sort of tanks rolling into Prague on 1968 or anything. I mean, it's not really that kind of imperialism. It's not really that kind of power.
Well, our cover piece, which we've just put to bed here at the Spectator, is about Trump and China in relation to Iran. And it's an interesting piece by Jeffrey Kane about looking ahead to Trump's visit to China and how, although it will probably be unspoken, the strategy of knocking out Ayatollah Khamenei, of doing what America is doing in Iran, was with a view to the greater game with China. What do you think about that analysis? I'm not going to ask you to comment on the piece because you probably haven't read it yet. It's only just gone to press. But I'd like to ask about that and talking about Turkey's relationship with China as well, because that's quite interesting.
Well, China gets a large proportion of its energy from China, from Iran, and it does so because it could buy oil wherever it wanted, but it gets cheap oil from Iran, so it's quids in, and it also doesn't care so much about international sanctions on Iran. So it's been the go-to. The go-to buyer for Iran's oil, therefore, by extension, the funder of the Iranian regime. And paradoxically, of course, what Trump has inadvertently done, the inadvertent consequence of the war, has been not totally unforeseeably, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which actually creates a problem for China and potentially an opportunity in the short term for Russia, because China can take up the slack by importing more oil from Russia. I mean, I think in terms of geostrategy, the Strait of Hormuz is too important to actually really be closed for very long, and I think there's going to be a solution, whether it's tactically through war, escorting ships and so on. But of course, it does raise an interesting question: is that actually the U.S. ships will be escorting Chinese tankers, which is maybe insured by the White House to fuel China's expansion. So, I mean, ironically, in fact, America and China actually have quite a strong shared interest in keeping, for instance, world energy prices stable and relatively low. There's a lot of talk about the attack on Iran emboldening Xi Jinping to now might is right. The rules-based order has been out of the window. It's been thrown out of the window. Actually, from China and Russia's point of view, the international law and the rules-based order was out of the window decades ago. I mean, they think what did you think you were doing? Like, you literally bombed Belgrade, you invaded Yugoslavia, and you created a new state because you thought that was a good thing and you were saving people from oppression in 1999, like sort of NATO, with no reference to the United Nations. So from the Russia and China's point of view, it's like, this is not the beginning of, this is not the end of something. It's just a further demonstration of what they regard as completely cynical and self-serving lip service that the West has been paying to the rules-based order, which the West itself has repeatedly ignored. And they would also point to regime change in Iraq and regime change in Libya and attempted regime change in Syria. So I don't really think that this is really a sea change or a shift of US policy, or particularly even more hypocritical than the previous US policies in the eyes of Beijing.
And just on Turkey and Beijing, because if Turkey gets involved in this conflict, becomes a key player, probably already is a key player in this conflict, how does Beijing's relationship with Turkey work?
I think I don't think Beijing cares, to be honest. I mean, it cares about its cheap oil. It doesn't really. It cares about, it has plenty of structural investments, but actually, Turkey is not a player in regional energy. I mean, Turkish allies in Central Asia are suppliers of energy, but in terms of money on the barrel, as the Russians say, I mean, there's I don't think. China really has very much to say about Turkish involvement or otherwise in an Iranian civil war.
Thank you very much, Owen. Always fascinating to talk to you. Thank you for taking us around the houses there.